Welcome to Three, a show about Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic and part of the Tennis Channel podcast network. I'm Gill Gross with Joel Drucker and Amy Lundy. Novak Djokovic has capped his 2022 season with a title at the year-end championships in Turin, his sixth career title at this event, tying Roger Federer for the record. It's the first time he's won it in 7 years since 2015, and he did it in a fashion that not everyone does it, which is sweeping it. He went undefeated. This is the only tournament you can win and also lose a match. But Novak beat everyone in his path. Last time we spoke, he was 2-0. Since then, he beat Medvedev in that final round-robin match. He beat Taylor Fritz in the semis. He beat Casper Ruud in the final, and there's plenty to get into when it comes to this Novak Djokovic run, and we are about to do it. Let's start with the final. Djokovic wins it 7-5. 6-3, unless I'm misremembering and it was 6-4. Joel, what stood out to you as the areas where Novak was able to get the best of Ruud and dictate the match?
So efficient. It's efficiency. Cashes in his first set point in the first set. Breaks serve fairly early in the second. Match championship point. Ace down the tee. And his serve. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the Novak serve surfaces more and more in his game. Yesterday, 9 aces, no double faults, won 69% of his second serve points. That's pretty. I think Pete Sampras would like those numbers.
I thought that it shows once again that Novak can win any number of ways. The fact that he was not feeling his best is almost scary, because if he had been feeling his best, what would the score be? You guys asked me before we hit record on this podcast if I enjoyed the final. I mean, sure, I love watching Novak play, but to me, the final wasn't really in question, and it was a mismatch on this surface. And therefore, I didn't enjoy it as much as some of the previous matches, like the Fritz match. In terms of Novak's performance, agree with Joel, the serving was fantastic. 71% of first serves in, which is even a little higher than what you'd want, because typically if it's that high, it means you're not going for enough on your first serve. But the caveat is, if it's working for you and you're winning a sky high percentage of first serve points won and second serve points won, then you're doing everything right, which he did yesterday.
I mean, all tournament long, Novak's first serve points won percentages have been through the roof. And yes, that was kind of a theme in these conditions for all players just dominating on their first serve. But it was actually the lengthy rallies and the second serve points that I think was so problematic for Ruud and helpful for Djokovic in winning this match. I mean, you mentioned the 71% second serve points won for Djokovic. That's way too high a number. You're never going to break serve if you're in Ruud's position there. And by the way, did you get a chance to look at Novak's average speed on second serves? 86 miles per hour. I mean, he was spinning it in, and he won 71% of points.
He won. That's right. Well, this has to do, the whole thing with Novak, which is so impressive to me, is his ability to understand his controls of how he can vary speeds and tempo. And it gets to some of the questions that we're going to always talk about. Well, what's better? It's like the talk we had about the Nadal serve. Is the Nadal serve better than this serve or that serve? But it's about the deployment and the awareness of the returner. And I think Novak's studious qualities are so attuned. I mean, I'm sure he was serving his first serve less faster, getting a lot in, because Ruud is a different type of returner than some other people. It's going to be interesting to see how service returners address Novak in, let's say, the next 3 years in this phase of Novak's of post-age 35 stage of his career.
Well, I think the really elite servers have a number of different second serves in their pocket. And the mentality is kind of like, I'm not going to serve you 100-mile-an-hour second serve if I don't have to. So I'm going to give you the most reliable sort of spin it in slow kind of second serve that I can give you until you show me that I can't get away with that anymore.
Right.
So Ruud just wasn't attacking the second serve. They were getting into extended rallies on those second serve points, and Novak was getting the best of him, even not feeling his best.
Yeah.
Ruud's thing is how do I really press Novak? And I think this gets to some developmental things of how, and Ruud admitted that. Ruud spoke very thoughtfully in his press conference about skills he needs to build. I mean, he didn't go deep into them like he was at some teaching conference, but he's aware of how he needs to probably dimensionalize his game. And he's 23, and we'll see. And I think one of the things that the three have shown us is that instead of, for a lot of pros, it was you only live once. Then you see some of the really great ones, they live twice. They have a second phase. Maybe with these guys, you live 3 times. You have 3 shots at reinvention. It'd be interesting to look at the length of the career and all the ways, most of all the ways everyone can afford. There's more money now, so they can afford pit crews that can keep them physical and therefore build the skills like Novak.
He could really afford it now. As if he couldn't before. He won well in excess of $4 million just in this one tournament alone.
And I think he passed the career earnings of 160 million.
Wow.
It used to be, God, I've been around it so long. I remember it was sort of a big thing when a player would have reached like $1 million in career earnings. That was like, wow, $1 million in career earnings. That's impressive. Now it's like, fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I think the forehands were interesting here. We've talked about Djokovic's forehand maybe being a little bit underlooked. We talked about whether or not Novak, when the ball comes to his backhand, if he should accept backhands or if he should run around and hit forehands. This was a match he was extremely aggressive and assertive with his forehand. It was an incredible weapon. And that is one area, Joel, where Ruud's development has always been ahead of the curve, is he has a massive forehand. The forehand winner stat in this match, 15-4 Djokovic. Amy, why do you think, that's a stat to me? If Ruud wants to win the match against Novak, he needs to win that category. And he almost got tripled up. With
his quality of forehand, Ruud's. And the winners overall was, I don't remember what it was, but that jumped out to me in the box score. I was really blown away with, we talked on the previous podcast about in balls that are hit to zone C, which is the zone of the court where you could either choose to hit your backhand or you could run around and hit forehand. What really blew me away is that in the first set, Novak clearly was not feeling well and was hitting a lot of backhand down the line. And in the second set, he started to feel a little bit better, and he was running around and hitting a little more inside out forehand, cross court. So I was just astounded that he could change tactics on a dime and employ totally different strategies, especially with the backhand down the line, because I think he was just trying to shorten points there, and both strategies worked.
Well, his footwork, I was thinking as we were about this, Federer is an A+ in the footwork technique department. Nadal is an A+ in the foot speed, get to the ball department. So Novak, as a combo, it's the combination of both. I'm not saying Federer is slow, and I'm not saying Nadal is sloppy. I'm just saying Novak's ability to do both. And so Ruud, he can hit forehand winners against a great many people. But now the way Novak moves to the ball and then does something to it, because you're not going to hit 2 big forehands against me. He's not just reaching the ball, Novak. He's throwing it back, saying like he did. Sometimes on some points he just went Novak's inside forehand to Ruud's backhand. Let's do that. That
was huge, wasn't it?
Yes, that was it. Yeah.
So let's talk about that. When Novak is on the run on his backhand, this might be his signature shot. This might be the shot that defines him more than any other shot. Novak hits that open stance drive backhand where he shows this unbelievable balance and strength and flexibility and timing, and that technique. He has it down pat. Ruud doesn't attempt that shot. It's not in the tool bag, and generally he slices his backhand when he's on the run to his left. I almost feel like this is an example of Novak in his technical proficiencies. Like, he's at an A level, and Ruud is still kind of in middle school. He's still kind of at that B level where, look, there's nothing horrific about slicing your backhand when it's on the run, but it's certainly not as good as being able to crush the ball with an open stance.
Well, and Ruud would admit that. Ruud admitted that yesterday. He knows, yeah, he's in the here and now phase of his lower division entry into the elite for a guy who finished the year number 3. But he's 3. He's not 1. Well, Novak's 5. That's a whole other question. But Ruud knows that, and I think that he knows that. So he knows, want to beat some of these other guys. It's not going to be a matter of just absorbing and redirecting and slicing down the line, having it bring it back to the forehand. He's going to have to learn how to hit. And Novak, by the way, yeah, he'll run around his backhand and hit his forehand inside against Ruud. I don't think he's so keen on doing that against Nadal, who can then hit a certain kind of forehand down the line that's going to just obliterate him.
Very true. Or I think even against Medvedev, who might be so good at changing direction with that backhand down the line, he'd rather stay in position and hit a backhand. But yeah, he knows if he hits his inside out forehand, Ruud isn't going to rip a backhand down the line to beat him. Absolutely spot on there.
I think with the absence of Federer and Novak returning to what I think should be a complete schedule next year. You know, we kind of undersaw Novak this year. I mean, he missed 2 majors, 2 swings in North America. I mean, a lot less Novak, but I think with him present more and Federer absent, I think we're going to be able to see a lot more of the chess-like aspects of what the Novak game is going to see. Oh, I see. This is what it's been up to all these years, this way of playing and how he uses it and how he's going to deploy it against a younger generation that's studied him and all that. Because there's these new kind of players emerging. Novak's not playing the kind of the Novak clones the way Nishikori, Goffin, who are kind of like cutting his. Now some different types of weaponry are emerging.
Let's talk about Djokovic's physical challenges. Start of this match, laundry list of evidence that he wasn't feeling well. We saw, I think, a lot of that in the Medvedev match, which I think I want to get back to. I saw some buzz that he had an eye infection, nothing from an incredibly reputable source. I mean, Amy, what was your read on what was going on with Novak, if anything, or maybe he was fine and just a little bit off? I don't know. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. Obviously, he came through it.
I have no idea. And the one thing I saw was like a trembling. His hand was trembling pretty bad during a changeover. And that's not something you can fake. So I don't know, just whatever it was, who on the planet would want to play a tennis match, a high-level tennis match, feeling that way? And yet he was able to rely on just really good tactics, good scouting, and his tenacity and his drive and his, willingness to fight through really difficult circumstances.
I called my story after covering it yesterday. I call it 3 Days in Turin. I go, is that a thriller? Is that a romantic comedy? But that was kind of, you look at those last 72 hours of that tournament, those 3 matches, the third set tiebreaker with Medvedev, 7-6, 7-6 with Fritz, nearly 2 hours. And then the final, and the final was less dramatic than the prior 2. But yeah, where Novak is physically, and remember, he is 35, and that doesn't mean he's as fit as a 35-year-old as you could imagine. But his tennis, and I don't know, we'll never know the full extent of his, or even half the extent of what was going on with him physically.
He said after the Medvedev match specifically that he didn't want to talk about it because he really had no interest in his opponents knowing, which was completely fair. So I was curious to see if he was going to chat about it after the final. Joel, you saw the transcript. Were there any questions about what was going on with Novak, how he was feeling at the beginning of that final that you
I
can
don't
recall?
recall. I sound like a Senate witness. I do not recall. I did not recall. I did not know I was going to be marshaled. Gil, it's a pop quiz you're giving me, and I saw the transcript 19 hours ago. Oh my God. I don't recall that.
Okay.
There was a lot of other thoughtful stuff from Novak about the tennis and a lot about his year, and like and I think as we all saw in the awards, he called it a roller coaster year. And Goran Ivanisevic gave a press conference, which was pretty thoughtful about maybe they meant for him to win it. It's like there's a whole it's great about tennis. All these every player camp is the center of the universe. It's like that's the way tennis works. Few tennis players see the world beyond themselves. So you see Goran, this was meant to be for Novak, which I guess it was.
Well, he also had that serve that we talked about at the beginning of the show, which was, I think, key early in the Ruud match when he wasn't feeling well. Key in the Medvedev match in the third set, where he really was struggling physically. That serve is such a get out of jail card, especially in these conditions where he can, focus on holding and winning the quick points, preventing the matches from getting physical just with that delivery.
Who would have thought that Novak Djokovic early in his career would begin to emerge as one of the greatest spot servers ever in the game, really starting to challenge Roger Federer on this front. And I'll be super interested to see what creativity he brings in this area of his game in 2023.
You just read my mind, Amy. I was thinking about Federer, and again, with Roger gone, as far as like the teachable service motion and deployment, I think Novak is kind of the top of the class right now among the active players. I mean, Federer has been the model for years, and Federer could also turn it on. I think in the 2009 Wimbledon final, he hit 50 aces in Wimbledon final, but still,
wow,
50. Yeah. And Federer had that kind of, he could reach that quantum level. I don't necessarily see Novak doing that or necessarily needing that, but not about aces, but about you use the word spot, like pinpointing and then set and his +1 and the forehand and the backhand. You think, where's my safe neighborhood hitting to this guy? Where do you safely hit to Novak and continue the point? And then with it serving well, it's gonna be tough.
It is. I'd love to see the Hawkeye data that can definitively show where everyone is at in terms of spot serving and accuracy, because I mean, it just popped in my mind. I wish we could quantify that, the technology is there that we can. I'd just love to see that. So I just want to throw that out there.
Well, though, like Novak earlier in his career, he had some technical glitches and hitches with the take back. Yeah. And then there was the elbow thing a few years ago that probably hurt the serve again in ways we'll never fully know, but stuff was amiss. And now that is one sweet motion.
And shout out to Goran, who is just the guru in that area, and Novak and Marian Vida, they have all showered Ivanisevic with praise for the work that he's done with that Djokovic serve.
Well, and remember, Ivanisevic was the one who helped Cilic when Cilic won the U.S. Open. He helped Cilic's serve, and so that would be interesting to talk sometime with Ivanisevic just about how he goes about that serve. I mean, granted, you're taking a player who's already a world-class player and then refining it, but still.
That Medvedev match is fascinating. I want to talk about it because psychologically, I thought there was a huge advantage for Medvedev coming in. He's 0-2. He had just lost 2 really tough matches. Obviously wanting to get on the board, getting that win over Novak that he was so close to in Astana before that unfortunate injury. To me, this felt like an important match for Medvedev that he was going to come in motivated for. Novak, meanwhile, 2-0. Already in the semifinal, having to play that semi the next day and facing a guy who's so good at making things physical and making you suffer. It was a terrible spot for Novak, and I thought he'd lose. He wins it in a 3-set war. How does he get the motivation, the drive, and the will to win that match?
You mean given the circumstances? It's funny, and we know there are probably cases of some pragmatism of players in Novak's position. I'm in the round. I'm guaranteed in the semis. Maybe I'll do something. Maybe I'll serve and volley every point because it's kind of like a freebie. It's like what is it, like a mulligan in golf or something. But I hand it to him. For he wanted to compete. He wants match play. I think in my when I was thinking about these 3 days, I think this is kind of a catalyst. I remind you of something Winston Churchill once said, "Is this the beginning of the end?" He says, "No, it's the end of the beginning." And I think this is kind of a prologue to something Novak wants to put in place for next year, even though it's several weeks away, to just kind of an emphatic statement of, I'm here, and I beat all 5 of you guys this week. Any questions? And if that means he had to labor and suffer versus a very driven opponent, so be it.
I just thought the margins were super close in both the Medvedev and Fritz match. And some of it occurred to me that some of it would have to come down to scouting, advanced scouting. Like we were talking about the placement of his serves earlier and the spot serving. So he'll get a report on Medvedev that from his data people that have been looking at Daniel's matches thus far in the tournament to look at his tendencies. And the report will say something like, if you serve Medvedev out wide on the deuce side, then 70% of what you're going to get back is going to be in X zone of the court. So the fact that he uses this data and he processes it and does his homework and knows this going into the match, that could give him just this little bit more of edge in his decision making. And it occurred to me that possibly that was the difference in both those 2 matches.
Don't they all have it?
Well,
no.
But
they all have access to it. Their coaches all have access to Hawkeye. There's a portal where you can get in. But when you log into Hawkeye, it is such a plethora of information and charts and tabs and stuff like this that for some players, they don't want to see it. Even the coaches are sometimes confused by it, and you actually need a really good data person to come in and kind of synthesize it for you and make it into nuggets. And then perhaps that person communicates to the coach or directly with the player. And it's really just these very refined nuggets. But a lot of players don't even use it.
The way you describe it makes you think of those binary documents you see from like computer programming with 1s and 0s and slashes. But I think I agree all that comes into play. And I think there's also something, a little bit of the mission Novak was on this week. It's like, in case you guys forgot, and he knew his fighting, Medvedev, who's been number 1 in the world this year, Taylor Fritz, making big plays and it's becoming the number 1 American, and all these things are like saying, you'll be the one who blinks, buddy. I mean, because both those matches, I mean, a 3rd set tiebreak, 2 tiebreaks in the other, a 7-5. So that means Novak played 4 straight overtime sets to finish the tournament.
Wow.
And actually, is it 5? Wasn't the 2nd set with Medvedev a tiebreaker also, Gill? I think it was. So 5 straight overtime sets, and he lost the 2nd set to Medvedev, I think. And
in a tiebreak.
Right. So, but the whole thing, there's the data, there's the knowledge, there's the technique, and then there's that kind of hand-to-hand combat. Okay, what have you got? Who's going to blink? I love my favorite Jimmy Connors line. He'd hear about some rising young player, told about it, and he said, what's he got? It's kind of like the ultimate, what's he got?
Yeah, and when you get into a war, sometimes it's a gut check.
Right.
You kind of throw out some of the tactical stuff and the technical stuff where it's like, how strong are you in that position? Like, that's what amazed me about that Djokovic Medvedev match is I really just thought most players would have thrown in the towel, essentially. Like, the fact that Djokovic fought as hard as he did for that third set kind of blew me away. I mean, obviously Medvedev served for the match. So yeah, I mean, to me, it was a gut check, and I thought it was the spirit of rivalry that pushed him ahead. It was
Absolutely.
this is about me versus Daniil, and that's why this means a lot to me, because when we play, that means a lot to me.
That's right. And now, granted, I think that stuff factors in tactics and all that, but there's also that point about, it's like, we're going to play the point now. We know all this stuff about each other and all this cognition, and that's good. And we're both, look, the technique of both of these guys, they're great players. And then it's kind of like, okay, who's going to blink? Here I come. Here I come. Deal with it. And that's kind of what makes competition so exciting. But I think that's the thing. Novak said, you're going to blink because I'm the boss.
I think Danielle has a lot of work to do in the off season, because at this point in the rivalry, Novak has edged ahead. He's made that pretty clear. So it'll be interesting to see what Medvedev does in the off season. Does he improve his volley, his net game? Does he improve the accuracy of his forehand? We'll see.
Well, in this offseason, you work on those things. And then the question is, how do you go about deploying such throughout the year? I think some of these guys like Medvedev and Alcaraz and possibly Ruud too, they're going to be looking a little differently at scheduling in the next 3 years. Which commitments are the 250s. It's like Ruud had a remarkable year. He finished number 3. He won 3 250s on clay and got to 4 significant finals. But that's not a year you want to repeat.
Yeah.
You don't want to repeat a year like that. You don't want to end up with 4 runner-up trophies the next year, right? So how do you, or just 3 victories on clay, the 250s. So how do you mix that? And what's the mix of skills? And what are even the things like even, okay, I'll throw it out. Doubles, go play a 250 and go play doubles also. Or doubles at Indian Wells, which a lot of players do, which, by the way, greatly aided Nadal's improvement, playing doubles a little bit.
Well, yeah, I think both Medvedev and Ruud have clear objectives for next year. Medvedev didn't win a title above 500 level, which is really a sharp turnaround for him, because he had been doing that easily, collecting a few big titles every year for a couple of years now, especially North American hard courts, indoor hard courts after the US Open. And then for Ruud, you're in 3 big finals. You play Alcaraz in Miami. You play Nadal at Roland Garros. You play Djokovic at the ATP Finals. He's an underdog in all 3 of those matches, and he looked like an underdog in all 3 of those matches.
And the US Open. And the US Open also.
Oh, sorry. Yes, and the US Open against Alcaraz. So he needs to go from not competing in those matches to competing in those matches, and Medvedev certainly in line for a bounce back year. But for Novak, it's been such a good run. I mean, really since Madrid, right? I mean, how much better could this year have been? And we don't want to get into it. We want to save some of it for just the year in review. But this cemented for me, this title cemented for me that Djokovic did just about as much as he could possibly do this year, given his opportunities when he was in the field and when he was able to compete.
I would agree with that. I think the only thing that he probably, based on what he could play, where he could play, the only thing he probably would have liked to win that quarter with Nadal at Roland Garros. Everything else was like, that's nice. These are good. The titles, rack them up, win some more, all good. But that was the only gap in the.
He might have liked to have won that Paris Masters, knowing him.
Oh, so there is. So he'll always not have Paris.
Yeah.
In both these tournaments.
What's really cool to me is, let's put Rafa aside for just a second, because Rafa is his own beast and he's unto his own. And right now he's the leader in Grand Slam tally. What I think is emerging is Novak Djokovic, just this sort of god of tennis. And then around him are these contenders who are in matches with him, particularly in best of 3, are just 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 5 points away from pulling off the victory. And that includes Tsitsipas, Medvedev, Rune, who actually did beat him. It's just this circle of young guys who are Fritz, who are just this close. So who's going to be able to really contend, if any of them, next year?
That's a great question. That gets to the whole margins and pressure play and blinking and skills. And is it supposed to be that close? Like, is it, you know, that's I think that was kind of, I think, intriguing for Novak of this the format of a 2 out of 3 indoors on a fast surface. You know, there's some different than the majors, but a certain type of zeroed in focus to it all, a real, you know, high noon kind of quality to a lot of the tennis. And so we're going to see when, as these guys develop, it's not about, they don't want to just be eking out a margin. They want to be like disposing of Novak, but what skills are they going to have to do that? He's waiting. You know, yeah, I think Rafa's in a different kind of silo because the way he competes and when and even his playing style, it's a different kind of thing. There's something, I think it's going to be, I want to do some research and talk with some of my source experts about the Novak genius, because it's going to be, like I said in the last show, it's going to come more visible with Federer gone. You know, there's going to be, well, what's been Novak's genius now? Because there's a lot of attention lavished to Federer's.
Yes.
So now instead of looking, now Novak is no longer the third one perceptually.
Great point.
He hasn't been the third one for a long time performance-wise. I mean, you look at his slam total since 2011. He's won more than the other two, but he hasn't occupied as much. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like a house, and Roger, the older brother, he's gone off to college.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Sure. Okay.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that point. Amy, I'm willing to give an opinion on your question.
Please, love to hear it.
I think developmentally, with this version of Djokovic, Alcaraz can get there. Rune can get there. The rest would need some decline from Novak. They would need a little bit of decline, which is okay. I mean, at the end of the day, a Novak Djokovic talent comes around 1 or 2 times, if that, you know, every couple decades. Like, it's okay that some of these other guys are just not Novak and will never be. So that's how I view it. Most of them would need some decline. A couple of them might actually get to that point where they can reach that level.
So you're banking on teen youth, because teen youth has shown you some explosiveness that the more 20s guys have kind of like maybe incremental, but not breakthrough.
Explosiveness.
You know, like how much your question is, how much better can Ruud or Medvedev really get? Oh, that means they might get some erosion from Novak. And that doesn't mean that we're not talking about who's winning slams. We're just talking about even, toppling Novak. Whereas you see it's a little more in Alcaraz and Rune's own hands. It's in their hands because of their skills.
Explosiveness and completeness.
Right.
I think, you know, there are weaknesses with a lot of that original next gen kind of players. Like, most of them have great strengths and then some holes. And what I really love about Alcaraz and Rune is those holes are pretty hard to find.
And they're young, and they're only getting, I mean, when I think of what Rune and Alcaraz are going to be physically intact and skillfully in 4 years. Right. Yeah. It's just funny. It's just funny the way the game goes so quickly. I mean, we watched so many of these generations go through. We watched, you know, like the Federer peers, like, Leighton Hewitt, Andy Roddick, and then Burdick and Tsonga and Nishikori and Milos Raonic. Just like one after another, these, you know, Dimitrov, these guys just kind of surface and they get their win at a smaller tournament. I mean, I don't know. I'm curious to see. Here's what I'll throw at Nick Kyrgios for what it's worth.
Easily. I mean, this could be controversial, but we can go out with the bang. Nick Kyrgios level was top 5 this year, and the stats will flesh that out. One of the best stats, I think, in all of tennis, win percentage. Nick Kyrgios, 4th in 2022. Anyway, right now it's all about Novak Djokovic, who goes into this offseason as the ATP Finals champion for a 6th time. Plenty of off-season chatter, year in review coming up. Probably go back to some Federer stuff at some point. But that'll do it for this episode of 3. Remember, we're available on all podcast platforms. We appreciate it if you leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. We will see you next time on the next episode of 3.